Okay, let's kick off this deep dive thinking about something, well, pretty fundamental to learning: textbooks.
Right. They're everywhere, aren't they?
Especially for subjects like English. I mean, for loads of students, that book is basically their main guide, yeah? For grammar, vocab, how to communicate.
And for teachers, too, it's often their roadmap for lessons. So, yeah, it's crucial they actually meet certain standards. They're not just books, they're supposed to be effective teaching tools.
Absolutely. Which brings us nicely to our source today. We've got a really interesting thesis that does exactly that. It puts a specific English textbook, one used right here in Indonesia, under the microscope.
It's titled An Analysis of English Textbook entitled Bahasa Inggris for second grade senior high school based on content standard of BSNP.
Hmm.
This was by Ika Rahayu back in 2021.
And the textbook itself?
It's the 2017 edition of Bahasa Inggris, published by the Ministry of Education and Culture, designed for 11th graders.
Got it. So our mission today really is to unpack what this thesis found. We're going to explore, based just on this research, how well this particular textbook aligns with a key part of Indonesia's national education standards.
Specifically, the criteria for content appropriateness laid out by BSNP, that's the Education National Standardization Board.
Think of this as your shortcut, right? We're boiling down this academic study for you.
Exactly. By the end, you should have a clear idea of how this one book did in that specific area, and maybe more importantly, what that tells us about, the whole challenge of evaluating educational stuff properly.
It's about the process, too, not just this one book.
Precisely. How do researchers actually check if these materials are doing the job they're meant to do?
Okay, so let's get into that. How did the researcher actually go about analyzing this textbook? What was the method?
They use what's called descriptive qualitative content analysis.
Right, so looking closely at what's inside the book, the actual content.
Yeah, systematically, in detail. The main technique was comparing the textbook's content against a specific rubric, kind of scoring guide, that was developed by BSMP.
Okay, so not just a general impression, but like a detailed checking process.
Very much so. It involved going through the materials, comparing them to the categories on this rubric, assigning scores based on how well they matched up, and then interpreting that data.
So they had this BSMP scorecard, and they went through the textbook chapter by chapter, scoring things.
That's basically it. Now, the full BSNP framework is broader. It covers content, language, presentation.
Layout, grammar, accuracy, that kind of thing.
Right. But, and this is important for our discussion, the researcher in this thesis specifically stated they focused only on the content appropriateness part.
Ah, okay, so that's our focus too for this deep dive. We're not looking at, say, how well the grammar is explained or if the pictures are nice, because the source didn't primarily cover that.
Exactly. We're zeroing in on the substance. Is the information, the learning points, the topics, are they suitable and correct according to these BSMP content standards?
Gotcha. So what does content appropriateness actually cover then, according to those standards? What were they looking for?
Well, there were a few key things within that. First, compatibility with the curriculum.
Does it teach what it's supposed to teach?
Basically, yeah. Does it align with the core and basic competencies, the KI and KD from the 2013 curriculum? Does it cover the required text types like dialogues or functional texts? And does it go deep enough?
Okay, depth, meaning does it help students really understand and use the language?
Right. Understand, remember, produce the language features. That's compatibility. Second was accuracy.
Is the stuff in the book actually correct?
Precisely. Things like the social function, does it teach how to use language appropriately for different situations? The generic structure, does it explain how different text types are typically organized? And linguistic features, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation info, is it all accurate?
Right, the building blocks need to be solid.
And the third main area was the supporting materials.
The extras, like pictures, examples.
Exactly. They looked at the relevance of those things. Are the illustrations, examples, topics current?
Yeah.
Are they interesting? Appropriate for 11th graders.
Okay.
And also the development of life skills. Do the activities help build other skills, personal, social, academic, maybe even job-related skills?
Beyond just the language itself?
Yes. And finally, within supporting materials, the development of diversity insight.
Ah, what does that cover?
Does the material encourage appreciation for cultural diversity, different viewpoints, democratic values, national awareness, that kind of broader understanding?
Okay, that framework makes sense. Compatibility, accuracy, and supporting materials covering relevance, life skills, and diversity. So, now the big question. What did the researcher find when they applied this to the textbook? Chapter by chapter, how did it score?
All right, let's get into the results across the 8 chapters. And first off, it's important to say the textbook actually did score very well in quite a few areas.
So it wasn't all negative.
Oh, definitely not. Many components got a 4, which is the top score, meaning very good. Things like the compatibility with the curriculum, matching the KI and KD that was often rated a 4.
Good.
Accuracy of linguistic features like grammar and the generic structures of texts, those also frequently scored 4. And the relevance of supporting material scored 4 in several chapters too, like chapters 1, 4, 5, 6, and 8.
So the core stuff covering the curriculum, getting the language right, seems pretty solid based on this analysis.
That's a fair summary of the strengths highlighted. But as you often find, the really interesting bits are where it didn't get top marks, where the scores were lower, like 1, 2, or 3.
Right, the areas needing improvement. What were some of those?
Okay, let's take chapter 3, which was called Party Time. The social function part, under accuracy, scored a 2.
Just enough, not good, or very good. Why was that?
Well, the analysis pointed out that the lesson plan specifically called for focusing on formal invitations. But the textbook, it included examples of both formal and more general social event invitations.
So a slight mismatch with the specific curriculum requirement for that section brought the score down. That's quite specific.
It shows how detailed the evaluation criteria are. Another area was the relevance of supporting materials. In Chapter 7, Meaning Through Music, this scored a 2.
Enough again. What was the issue there?
The reasoning given in the thesis was that some pictures, or maybe specific examples, like mentioning a particular singer the researcher felt students wouldn't know, might not be relevant or engaging enough for the target age group.
That's interesting. Relevance isn't just about being technically correct, but also about connecting with the students. An outdated reference can just fall flat.
Exactly. Then there was the development of life skills, integrated into the supporting materials. The scores here were a bit varied.
Yes.
Chapter 2, Opinions and Thoughts, scored 2, enough. But chapters 3, Party Time, 6, Cause and Effect, and 8, Explain This, scored 3, which is good.
Okay, so some chapters were rated good at building those extra skills, others just enough. Sounds like maybe inconsistent success across the book in that area.
That seems to be what the scores suggest, yeah. Varying levels of integrating things like critical thinking or maybe collaboration into the activities.
Right. And what about the last one? Development of diversity insight. You mentioned that earlier.
Yes. And according to this analysis, this seems to be a more consistent area of weakness for this textbook.
Really? How did the scores look there?
They were generally lower across most chapters. Chapter 4, Natural Disaster, actually scored a 1.
Wow, 1 is poor, right?
Yes. And then chapters 2, 3, 7, and 8 scored 2, enough. Chapters 1 and 6 scored 3, good.
So only 2 chapters rated good, several just enough, and 1 poor. That is a pattern. That seems like a significant finding.
It really stands out with the results. If you think about what that category means, fostering appreciation for diversity, different cultures, democratic values, this analysis suggests the textbook, based on its content, might be falling short in consistently promoting those broader perspectives.
That feels important. Books don't just teach English, they shape how students see the world, even subtly. A weakness in diversity insight seems like a potential blind spot.
It's definitely something the analysis highlights.
Yeah.
So bringing all these chapter scores for content appropriateness together, the thesis calculated an overall score.
And the final verdict, what was the number?
The overall percentage score for content appropriateness came out as 78.12%.
78.12%. Okay, and where does that put it on the scale they use?
According to the classification mentioned from Pusat Perbukuan back in 2011, a score between 60% and 79% falls into the fair category.
Fair. Okay, so not poor, but also not good or very good, just fair.
That was the conclusion of this specific analysis regarding content appropriateness. It basically says, look, the book is relevant to the curriculum, it covers most of the required bases, and lots of parts are actually very good, hence those 4s we saw.
Right.
But it doesn't fully meet the highest BSMP standards across all the content criteria that were examined.
And the reason it's fair and not higher are those specific areas we talked about, particularly the development of diversity insight, the inconsistent life skills integration, and those couple of issues with social function or relevance in certain chapters.
Exactly. Those weaknesses brought the overall content score down into that fair range.
Okay, so let's bring this back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
What does this actually mean? If you're a student using this book or teacher or maybe involved in education policy, how should you read this fair rating for content?
Well, it certainly doesn't mean throw the book away.
Yeah.
A fair rating indicates it has value, especially in covering core content, which it did well in many aspects, according to the analysis.
Right.
But it does mean that this specific analysis provides a critical lens. It highlights areas where the book, according to the researcher applying these standards, could be stronger.
So for students using it, maybe the message is trust the basic language stuff, the grammar, the structures, that seems generally solid. But be aware that you might need to look beyond the textbook for, say, broader perspectives on diversity or for developing certain life skills.
That's a good takeaway. And for teachers, this kind of analysis is incredibly useful.
How so?
It gives them concrete information. If choosing texts, they know this one's strengths in curriculum alignment and accuracy. But critically, it flags areas, especially that diversity insight piece, where they'll probably need to consciously supplement the textbook.
Bring in other materials, maybe design specific activities, adapt lessons.
Exactly. To ensure their students get a well-rounded education that meets all the goals implied by the BSNP standards, not just the ones the textbook covers strongly.
And I guess for publishers or curriculum developers, this is direct feedback, isn't it?
Absolutely. This kind of detailed, criteria-based analysis pinpoints precisely where future editions or completely new materials could be improved to better align with those broader educational aims.
It translates standards into actionable points.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just to quickly recap this deep dive, we've looked closely at a thesis analyzing an 11th grade English textbook used in Indonesia. We focused only on its content appropriateness based on BSNP standards.
And we found that while the textbook showed definite strengths, particularly in covering the core curriculum and language accuracy,
Lots of fours there.
the analysis also identified notable weaknesses. The most consistent seemed to be in the development of diversity insight, along with some variability in life skills integration and specific issues in a couple of chapters. This led to an overall rating of fair for content appropriateness in this study.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. Textbooks are so foundational. Thinking about this analysis, how might a textbook that scores fair, especially in an area like developing diversity insight, subtly influence how a student understands the world around them? And what does this tell us about the shared responsibility for educators, publishers, everyone involved to make sure our learning materials go beyond just teaching the subject matter and actively help foster things like cultural understanding, empathy, and critical thinking?